You're listening to Stimulus Tech Talk, a conversation-based podcast created by Stimulus Technologies that covers a range of topics related to business and technology.
Welcome to Stimulus Tech Talk. I am Sherry Lip, the marketing manager at Stimulus Technologies, and I am here with Stimulus Technologies CEO Nathan Whitaker. And it is the first podcast we're recording in the new year. So happy New Year, Nathan.
Happy New Year to you, Sherry. I'm sure this is a couple of weeks away. Most businesses are well into 2026. Time flies by quickly. I've been reading one of my goals from last year and going to continue on into 26 is to read paper books, at least 10 pages a day. And I've been reading this book by Jesse Cole. It's called Fans First. You and I have heard of Speak, right?
Yeah.
One of our peer events. One of the things he says in there is we should entertain always and make things fun and lighthearted. So, can we make this funny at all?
You do the jokes.
I do, and I got to record mine for the first joke of 2026. So I've been racking my brain about what to record. If you haven't seen our jokes, you can check out the shorts on YouTube and all the other social media platforms. The jokes tend to get more views than our podcast content. So obviously Jesse Cole's onto something about entertaining always rather than giving you guys information.
We'll try to make the information fun, although we are talking about tax season, as much as we might not want to think about it, is upon us.
All right, well, let's just end that now.
Specifically, what CPAs need to know about cybersecurity and tax season. Are CPA firms even more vulnerable during the tax season to scams?
I think so. But one of the things that happens, we have quite a few CPA clients, and we find that they get very busy, obviously, during the first part of the year. And I think it's in general when we're talking about cybersecurity, talking about social engineering, and tools that hackers use to convince people to do things they wouldn't normally do, is they take advantage of that busyness. And so the more busy we are, the more vulnerable that we are to attacks because we're less likely to really dig into email that you might get in or the phone call or the request because you just are overwhelmed. I think, we've had a couple of podcasts talking about end of year overwhelm and employees are wanting to get out on vacation and take time off for the holidays, but they still have, a lot of work. The same thing goes for CPA firms during tax season is they're often working long hours. They might bring on staff that is unfamiliar with their processes and procedures. So there's less training for maybe some temporary or seasonal staff. And then even worse is they're dealing with a lot of financial data. So, it might be something easier that a client may just email a W-2 or prior tax return, confidential information. And, the CPAs are maybe less likely to, enforce procedures to ensure that confidential data goes through secure channels. So I just think that there's so much data that comes in, so much data to process that as humans, we're less likely to be cautious during those times of high periods of work.
And I'll get back into the temporary staff or contractors in a moment, but what kind of scams do you see? Are there scams particular to CPA or financial firms and industries?
I think some of the scams that we'd be looking at is potential client impersonation. So, an attacker poses as a client and might send false information, might make requests for a change of account for maybe a refund. We've seen that before that, kind of like the direct deposit scam, it might be a refund account change request. I think the other thing is, you've got to be careful of a lot of CPA firms have their own secure portal, as I mentioned before, to upload and download documents. But potentially the hacker might use a similar type of technique to send documents to the CPA firm, false documents, and then the CPA would fall for a phishing scam, clicking on a link, expecting it to be coming from a client, but might be coming from a malicious third party or hacker. Some other things that hackers are going to constantly be looking for, kind of in the same line of those attacks, is to get access to those tokens in Microsoft 365 so that they can hack into your email accounts and watch for those communications with clients. And at the right time, when the client knows that they're getting a refund potentially, that's when they would initiate some type of those impersonation attacks. So there's a lot of things we have to be careful for. And hackers, if they're being smart right now, they are putting and laying those traps in for the CPAs to get them to do something they wouldn't normally do as the tax season moves along. So there's definitely a lot of standard attacks, but this is the time where hackers would initiate them, because this is when the CPA firms are most vulnerable.
And are those kind where they're impersonating a client, are those the most likely to look legitimate to the staff?
I think so. That is what often happens is, they've known that a client, either through maybe on their webpage or something like that, have testimonials of prior clients, and then they'll impersonate that client requesting different information, or again, as I mentioned, like the ACH or wire fraud or invoice fraud, things like that, they ask for change of account information. So yeah, that's really what happens, and it's really can be very hard for employees, because they're expecting that information come in from the client, expecting that communication, and unless they have very good multi-factor authentication on their clients, like alternative ways to communicate or verification of email accounts, things like that, it's pretty easy for an attacker to impersonate a client, or a vendor, impersonate somebody else, documents coming in potentially from another party. It's definitely, CPAs need to be on high alert for all these different types of impersonation attacks.
And are the hackers after client data, or are they after money from the CPA firm?
I think both. Again, like I said, the great way that hackers are going to go after it is changing direct deposit accounts so they can get refunds from the tax returns, maybe filing fraudulent tax returns, so impersonating clients, impersonating potential clients, and then having the CPA firm file taxes and get a refund that's fraudulent. So that's something that can happen. So there's different ways that they can get direct money. But then, same thing as if they're after information, they could be getting account information that's being sent. Maybe the CPA firm is receiving bank account information or investment account information. And so that's a plethora of information that the CPAs may get as part of their ongoing tax filing. And the hackers, if they know that they have a high net worth individual that they're dealing with, the CPA firm is dealing with, and get their investment account information, that's another step that hackers can go to attack that individual. So they're gathering information too that might be coming in from clients, and that would perpetuate another attack against their client.
And how can CPAs or staff in the office, what are the red flags they can look for this?
I think some things that it's the same stuff that we often talk about, is even though you're busy, to slow down and verify information. If it doesn't look quite right, then don't assume it, and then use another way to verify that information. If there's changes for, let's say, for direct deposit, use another callback number for the client. Don't just do the work. So if there's anything like that, any changes to deposit accounts, pick up the phone, call the known number. CPA firms could potentially implement some type of PIN system, a verification system for changes like that. So there's plenty of solutions out there to send a text message to a known number, something like that, through your CRM to approve those changes. So if there's something that's odd that's happening, out of norm, stop, slow down, ensure that you have the information. And then the final thing is CPA firms should take some proactive measures for their clients, especially the small firms that might be just starting out, the sole single practitioner. make sure that you have a very good, robust client portal set up so that and easy enough that the clients want to submit through that, because you don't want to be taking confidential information over email. So have a client portal set up, good multi-factor authentication on that for the clients, and then talk to and train the clients on the use of that portal and explain the reason why you want to accept documents through a client portal versus email is to ensure that that data that's being sent is secure and confidential, and the only way that you can really ensure it is through that client portal and not through email. Even if you try to send an encrypted email, it isn't the best way to get data into a CPA firm, because it might go to an employee that has a compromised email box, things like that. So the secure portal is the best way to do it. One big takeaway, if you're a CPA firm and you don't have a client portal, make sure you're investigating that now. There's plenty of them out there. It might be built into your, existing tax software. It might be separate. It's like ShareFile or using a SharePoint site or something like that. But I recommend something a little bit more complicated to ensure that you have good MFA set up and have a secure location for all those documents that your clients can upload.
So if you have a client that's like, I want email, I don't want to set up the portal, it has to be a line in the sand.
For their protection, you're not going to accept it over email. If they don't want to abide by that, maybe have them send it via FedEx or paper or drop it off of your office, some other method. But certainly email is one of the worst things you can do for that type of data.
How do you suggest training? Have we helped people and train temporary employees and contractors?
Yeah, it's certainly this time of year is a good time to do an full annual assessment of your employees and training. So our training portal for clients is usually about a 2 to 3 hour process for all the employees to go through, all the current threats that are out there, and make sure that they're trained and secure. And it's part of some of the guidelines that the IRS has put out, for CPA firms that they have to abide by if they're going to do electronic tax returns, that they have to put these type of implementations in place. So this is a very good time before tax season really kicks off in full force at the end of January. Take the first couple of weeks of January to train your staff, especially if you have seasonal staff that's coming on board, run them through those trainings, and really enforce this communication with your clients of using the secure portal, training your clients on it. Maybe as you're sending your, a lot of CPA firms send out forms to their clients of, documents that they should be collecting. This would be a good time to generate a document on how to securely communicate with you as a CPA firm. Maybe another thing to do is take it from HIPAA of having, a confidential PIN or passcode. If there's any type of, confidential communication or changes like, to your direct deposit or ACH, that they have to supply that type of PIN or passcode, just like medical records. This would be a good time to communicate with all your clients and get that set up too.
What's the first thing somebody should do if they do click a bad link? This probably goes for everybody. I know we've talked about it, but do you see anything with a CPA firm, like a common mistake that they might make?
I think from human nature, if they click a bad link, there's this desire to like hide it. Hey, I did something wrong. I don't want to tell anybody. I think that's the first thing that anybody should do is notify IT what they did. And so, it might be locking the account. Maybe there's exploration to and audit the account that the IT department has to do. If you get a bad link, or if a link does something that you didn't expect it to do, please notify the IT department, because we want to ensure that your account's not compromised. Because what a lot of times hackers will do is, you'll click a bad link, it doesn't seem to do anything. Maybe it does something that you didn't expect. And now they might have access into your account, but they're just going to watch for a while to see what happens with your account. And then maybe 3, 6 months later, they're going to, make that attack. So really, these attacks are probably going to be coming in now to your accounts, and then they're going to, jump on it in April when you're really busy and trying to get all these tax returns done. So if you do click on something, if your computer is doing something strange, a link does something strange, just notify IT immediately so that there could be an audit done and forensics done on your account to make sure that there's no compromise of your account or computer.
I mean, we were talking about temporary employees. Is that something stimulus can help with? Because I imagine that those accounts are more vulnerable if somebody's in and out. And you said people are very busy, of course, this time of year. How do we help monitor those and get those offboarded correctly?
I think that's a good point. A lot of times what happens, and we see a lot of the larger attacks occur because of temporary accounts or vendor accounts. So if you're bringing in, an outside vendor to assist with tax returns, or if you have temporary employees that come on board, critical thing that I want to mention is that that account should be shut down as soon as they stop working for you. So, make sure that you're putting in tickets with stimulus or your IT department to ensure that those vendor accounts or temporary employee accounts are shut down immediately once they stop working for you. 'Cause that tends to be what happens is those float around for weeks or months, and then they're vulnerable for an attack in the future. So just shut them down quickly. If you're setting up accounts, obviously things we are always enforcing is multi-factor authentication. Want to iterate too is if they are using their own devices, let's say it's a vendor or a contract employee and it's not one of your company devices, we highly recommend not allowing them to have data on their device, that they should be logging in to a remote access server or something like Azure Virtual Desktop, so that you have the security controls in place on their devices just the same as you do. So that's another thing I'd want to mention for those contractor temporary employees. If they're not using or getting a device from you as a company, that they shouldn't be able to store or use your systems on their computers. Even if it's just a website they're going to, access the data, it shouldn't be allowed to be accessed from BYOD or bring your own device, because there's no security controls on that system.
Is that where you might see gaps in security, and like with Microsoft 365 or any of the software they're using? Are there settings that where you see vulnerability more often?
That often comes up is when we set up like conditional access policies in their Microsoft 365 account. Let's say they're getting a contractor from outside the US. Conditional access doesn't allow access from the Philippines or India, or where some of these contractors might be coming from. So what we wouldn't want to do is allow direct access from locations other than corporate locations, or minimally the United States. So we would allow access into a remote server or Azure Virtual Desktop, and then from that server we would allow access into their system. So we ensure that there's not a vulnerability that's coming in from outside the United States. That's one of the things that we often monitor is when there's travel that happens, that access doesn't isn't allowed from new locations, because a new location is where a hacker would be coming in from, and so it's an easy way to stop that type of attack. So this gets a little bit more complicated, but if you are bringing on temporary employees or people, especially from outside the United States, there's more likely that there's weaker laws, weaker protections, and so we have to be more stringent on that type of access. So be prepared for a little bit of complication that comes in as you want to implement those temporary vendors or temporary employees, if they're outside the United States.
And to wrap it up, what should a CPA firm look for if they're going in for an outsourced IT, as far as expertise in CPA software and security?
What you just said, expertise or history. There's CPA firms know, especially if you're dealing with business accounts. There's a lot of complication. For example, a lot of businesses that use desktop QuickBooks, you have to have like every version of QuickBooks desktop that might be out there, or you might need access into client data, and so you're dealing with getting access into there. There's a lot of different softwares that has to be installed. So, an experience with CPA firms is essential because it is a complicated environment. And then add on top of that the cybersecurity requirements that are now being enforced by the IRS. There's a lot of things we have to put in place to ensure that CPA firms are secure. I would not say though that you should be changing IT firms during tax season. So, unless there's something major that's going on, that you're really worried about it. This is something after April 15th that we'd be happy to talk to you if you have questions about it. But, don't try to rock the boat too much during tax season, because it is painful for everybody, that if you have to, if you make a change during this period, it's going to be more problematic in the environment. So come talk to us in a couple of months when you're less busy, and we're happy to help you out solving some of these problems. We love CPA firms as clients, but their environments are complex, and there's a lot of things we have to do to make sure that you're secure. So if you have any questions or want to at least want an audit, I'm happy to do it. But let's talk about it after tax season for sure.
Well, thanks, Nathan, and thanks everybody, and we'll have to think of some more jokes.
Yeah, I can't off the top of my head, no CPA jokes other than good luck.
Thanks, Nathan.